I never told my son what was really locked inside that old workshop behind his diner. When his wife started asking questions about it, I knew exactly what kind of woman I was dealing with. I let her dig her own grave for weeks. But the night her hired men finally broke through that door, it wasn't the police lights that stopped my heart cold. It was seeing my own son standing in the middle of it. My phone rang at 11:40 on a Tuesday night, and I knew before I even picked it up that something had gone wrong. Nate Ruiz doesn't call after 9 unless the building's on fire or somebody's dead. "Ray," he said, his voice tight and low. "You need to get down here now. Somebody's cutting the chain on the back door." I stood there in my kitchen, in my socks, one hand on the counter, and I felt something settle inside me instead of rising. Calm, cold, and steady, the way it always gets right before I know exactly what I'm going to do. "Who is it, Nate?" I asked. He hesitated just long enough for me to already know the answer. "It's Kayla, Ray. She's got 2 men with her, and they're not here to admire the paint job." I told him to stand down and stay out of sight. "Don't call anybody. Don't stop them. Let them walk right up to that door and open it if that's what she came for." Nate asked me twice if I was sure, the way a man does when he thinks his boss has finally lost his mind after 69 years on this earth. I was sure. I'd been waiting on this exact moment for 3 months, ever since the night my daughter-in-law first asked me a question she had no business asking. "My name is Ray Coleman. I've spent 46 years with my hands inside the engines of cars most people would call junk, bringing them back to life one bolt at a time out of a garage on the edge of Savannah that my father built with lumber he couldn't afford." People drive past Coleman Classic Auto and see an old man in a stained jumpsuit who talks slow and walks slower since the hip surgery. What they don't see is 4.5 decades of watching who pays on time, who lies about a part they broke themselves, and who smiles at you while they're already planning how to take what's yours. My son Tyler is 33 years old, and he is the best thing his mother and I ever built together before cancer took her 6 years ago. He runs a little diner 2 blocks from the marina called the Rusty Fork, a place he saved for and bled for and built with his own 2 hands, starting at 19 years old. Tyler trusts people the way I used to before this town taught me better. He married Kayla 18 months ago, a woman who posts videos online about living your best life, standing in front of borrowed cars and rented houses with a smile she practiced in a mirror. It started at their anniversary dinner downtown, back when I still thought she was just a little vain and nothing worse. I was working on my second glass of sweet tea when Kayla set her wine down a little too hard and turned that camera-ready smile on me. "Ray," she said, "I drove past your shop last week, past that old building out back behind Tyler's diner. What exactly is in there?" I kept my face easy, but every alarm I owned went off at once inside my chest. That building had never once come up in conversation with her. Tyler barely thought about it himself. "Just old parts and dust," I told her. "Nothing worth looking at." She laughed, light as air, and said it just seemed like a lot of prime real estate for a junk closet. Didn't I know some developers who'd pay good money for waterfront land like that? I looked over at my son, and he was grinning at his wife like she'd said something clever, blind to the way her eyes had gone sharp and hungry for 1 second before that smile slid back into place. I paid the check that night the way I always do. Kayla never reaches for her purse. On the drive home, I thought about my late wife Carol, about every callus this business ever put on my hands, and I decided right then that whatever Kayla Coleman was hunting for behind that door, she was never, ever going to find it. The knock came at 9 sharp on a Saturday morning, 1 week after that dinner, and when I opened the door I found Tyler standing there beaming with Kayla right beside him holding a slick leather folder against her chest like she was about to pitch a television show. "Dad," Tyler said, "Kayla's been up half the night putting something together for you. She really thinks you're going to love this." I stepped back and let them in, poured 3 cups of coffee, and sat down at my own kitchen table, while my daughter-in-law spread out a glossy little presentation across the wood. There were pie charts. There were property tax estimates printed in bold red numbers. There was an aerial photograph of my land with a bright circle drawn around the old building behind Tyler's diner. "Ray," she said, her voice dripping with rehearsed concern, "you are bleeding money on that building, property taxes on something doing nothing but collecting dust. And at your age, you should be enjoying your golden years, not carrying dead weight around. I've got developer contacts who would pay top dollar, and I would handle every bit of it myself. You wouldn't have to lift a finger." Tyler nodded along like she was reading him scripture. "Dad, she's right," he said. "You don't need that kind of stress anymore. Let her help you." I flipped through the paperwork slow, the way an old man does when the numbers overwhelm him, and I let Kayla believe every word of it was landing exactly the way she wanted. She'd clearly done her homework pulling public tax records. What she didn't understand was that public records never tell a soul what's actually sitting behind a locked door. This is a lot to take in, I told her, tapping the folder closed. I never sign anything the same day I read it. Give me a week to sit with it. Her jaw ticked, just barely, the first hairline crack in that camera-ready smile. Of course, Ray, she said. Just remember opportunities like this one don't wait around forever. As I walked them both to the door, I caught her eyes drift toward the hallway closet where I keep an old fireproof filing cabinet, and she held that look 2 full seconds longer than any innocent glance ever needs. 2 seconds was more than enough for me. I stood on my porch after they drove off and watched her taillights disappear around the corner, thinking about how a woman who claims to sell abundance mindset to 40,000 strangers online had just spent an entire week building a pitch deck for a shed she'd never once been allowed inside. 3 days later, my phone rang again, and this time it was Tyler, his voice cracking in a way I hadn't heard since he was a boy, scared of thunder. "Dad," he said, "something's wrong with the diner account. The card machine just declined 4 times in a row, and the bank's saying the account's frozen." I drove over there fast as my knee would let me and found him standing behind his own counter looking pale, staring at a screen full of red warnings while a line of customers waited with their coffee going cold. "Kayla handles the books," he told me, hands shaking. "She set up the automatic payments herself months ago. This has to be some kind of mistake." Kayla arrived 12 minutes later, and I want you to understand something about the woman who walked through that door. Gone was the polished consultant who does skincare videos in perfect lighting. Her hair was a mess. Her mascara had run. She snatched the phone from Tyler's hand and started dialing, pacing tight little circles by the register, hissing about a security flag and a banking error to whoever picked up on the other end. 10 frantic minutes later, she thrust the phone at the bank teller on speaker, and whatever voice answered bought her 30 days to sort it out. Tyler hugged her right there in front of the register, relieved, telling her not to worry about a thing. But I was standing behind him, and for one bare second, before she remembered to put the mask back on, I watched something cross Kayla's face that had nothing to do with embarrassment. It was fear. Real, cold, animal fear. Women who run 6-figure consulting businesses don't shake like that over a glitch. My gut, the same gut that spent 46 years learning to spot a con before it opened its mouth, told me this was no longer about greed alone. Something else was chasing my daughter-in-law, and it was chasing her hard. They showed up on my doorstep that Friday evening with overnight bags, claiming a burst pipe had flooded their apartment, and they needed somewhere to stay for a few nights. I knew better the moment I saw them standing there. A woman drowning in the kind of trouble Kayla was drowning in doesn't check into her father-in-law's guest room over a busted pipe. She checks into a hotel and lets the insurance handle it. But I smiled, told them the spare room was already made up, and went to bed early, because I needed her close, and I needed her comfortable enough to slip. I didn't sleep that night. Somewhere past 2 in the morning, I heard the third stair from the bottom groan the way it always does, and I lay still in the dark listening to soft footsteps cross the hallway toward my study. Through the gap in the door, I watched Kayla kneeling in front of my old fireproof filing cabinet, a penlight clenched between her teeth, working the lock with a thin metal pick like she'd learned the trick off some video online. She wasn't a professional. She was a desperate woman who had simply run out of better options. I let her get the drawer open before I flipped the hallway light on. She spun around gasping, caught cold in the glow. "Kayla," I said, keeping my voice groggy and mild, "what in the world are you doing down here in the dark?" She recovered fast, hand pressed to her chest, breathless. "Ray, I am so sorry. I couldn't sleep, and I got turned around looking for water. Kitchen's the other way," I told her gently. "Let me show you." When she'd gone back upstairs, I checked that drawer myself and found nothing missing. Only her fingerprints in the dust where curiosity had gotten the better of caution. The next morning, I drove out to meet Diane Osei, a private investigator I'd hired twice before in my life, both times when I needed the truth about somebody fast and couldn't afford to be wrong. 3 days later, she slid into the booth across from me at a diner near the water with a thick folder and tired eyes. "You were right to be suspicious," she said. "Kayla's consulting business barely exists on paper. She's had exactly 2 paying clients all year, and everything you see online is staged for the followers, who happen to be the actual product. She sells them a course on financial freedom while sitting on nothing herself. How is she affording the car, the clothes? I asked. Credit, Diane said. Max 6 different ways. 2 years ago, she put most of it, plus family money that wasn't hers to spend, into an online trading platform that turned out to be a scam. Lost nearly all of it in a single weekend. When the banks cut her off, she went looking for private money, and right now she owes just under $200,000 to a man named Reeves, who does not run anything close to a bank. My stomach went cold and still. There's more, Diane said, sliding another page across the table. She's been quietly pulling small amounts from Tyler's diner account for close to a year, dressed up as supply orders and vendor payments. That's why his card kept getting declined. If it keeps going at this rate, that diner closes before the end of the season. I sat there feeling the same focused calm I used to feel standing over a dead engine, knowing exactly which bolt to loosen first. She had put my son's life's work on the line and lied to his face every single day while she did it. And that was a line that did not get uncrossed. I spent that afternoon in the back office with Nate, building a manifest that didn't exist. We listed a collection of restored vintage engine parts, supposedly pulled from a rare batch of 1950s roadsters, worth an estimated $350,000, and sitting unregistered in the building behind Tyler's diner. I had Nate stitch a hidden tracking number into the barcode printed at the bottom of the page, small enough that nobody desperate enough to steal it would ever think to look twice. I stamped the whole thing confidential in red ink and slid it into the same drawer Kayla had already cracked once, buried deep enough that she'd have to dig, shallow enough that she'd find it fast. Then I called a man I knew from the security company and had 3 hidden cameras installed in my study before the sun went down. 5 days after the cameras went in, I picked Tyler up from the diner one evening and told him I needed to show him something. No explanation, just get in the truck. He didn't argue, he never does with me, and we ended up parked in the empty lot across from the marina, with the windows cracked and the smell of salt water drifting in. I opened my laptop on the dashboard and played him 30 seconds of footage from my study. Kayla kneeling at that filing cabinet in the dark with a pen light in her teeth. I told him some of it plainly, not all of it. That his wife had been going through my private papers at night, that something wasn't adding up with her business, that I needed him to trust me a little longer before I said anything more. Tyler sat there for a long moment with his jaw working, staring at the frozen image on the screen. Dad, he finally said, his voice low and hard in a way I'd rarely heard from him. Is this really about her, or is this about the fact that you never wanted me to marry her in the first place? The question landed like a slap, mostly because there was a grain of old truth buried inside it. And for a second, I didn't have an answer ready. I have never once tried to control who you love, I told him, but I have spent my whole life learning how to spot somebody who's using it. He looked away from me, out at the black water, and said nothing else the whole ride home. That silence sat between us for 3 more days. Tyler started coming into the shop less, started looking at his wife across the dinner table the way a man looks at a stranger wearing his wife's face. I could see him turning it over, testing the weight of what I'd shown him against 14 months of a marriage he still wanted to believe in. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that 2 nights before the trap was set to spring, Tyler picked up Kayla's phone off the kitchen counter while she was in the shower and saw a text thread with a contact saved simply as R. Thursday night, it read. 10:30. Same door code as before. Don't be late this time. He never told me he saw it. He never told anyone. Instead, he did something far more dangerous than confronting her outright, something that came from the same stubborn Coleman blood running through both our veins. He decided he was going to see it for himself, whatever it was, before he let either his father or his wife tell him another version of the truth, secondhand. Thursday night arrived quiet and warm, the kind of Savannah evening where the air hangs heavy with salt and cut grass. I sat in my truck 2 blocks from the diner, watching the feed on my phone, waiting for the moment 3 months of patience would finally pay off. Nate was stationed out of sight near the front gate. Diane had already alerted her federal contact earlier that week, the one who oversaw the site behind Tyler's diner, the one who knew exactly what that building had actually been used for these past 4 years. I had no earthly idea that somewhere across town, my own son was climbing into his truck alone, engine off, headlights dark, following a route he'd memorized from a text message his father never saw. By the time I noticed a second vehicle idling near the tree line beyond the fence, half hidden in shadow, it was already too late to call anybody off. I squinted at the shape of it in my mirror and felt something cold drop straight through my chest because I recognized that truck. I had bought it for him myself 3 years earlier as a graduation gift for the diner. My hand froze over my phone. Whatever was about to happen inside that building in the next few minutes. My son was no longer a man watching from a safe distance. He was already standing close enough to get caught in it. The first thing that told me the trap had sprung was the light. Every floodlight around that building came alive at once, turning the whole lot white as noon. And a siren I hadn't heard since the night it was installed tore straight through the quiet of the marina. I was already moving, phone pressed to my ear, dialing Tyler's number over and over while I ran a route toward that fence line faster than my hip had let me run in 15 years. Federal agents poured out from 3 directions at once, weapons raised, shouting for everyone on the ground to get down. I watched 2 men near the cut chain drop immediately, hands laced behind their heads, faces pressed into the gravel without a shred of argument. Men who do that kind of work for a living know exactly what a losing position looks like the moment they're standing in one. Kayla did not go down quietly. She screamed that it was all a misunderstanding, that she was only visiting family property, right up until an agent had her face down with her wrists zip-tied behind her back, her voice cracking into something raw and unrecognizable. I reached the fence line with my chest burning and my hands shaking too hard to work the latch, and that's when I saw him. Tyler was standing near the tree line where his truck sat half hidden in shadow, frozen in place between 2 agents who had their rifles trained on a shape they hadn't yet identified. "Sir, hands where I can see them," one of them shouted, and my son lifted his arms slow, his face drained of every drop of color, looking like a man who had wandered into the middle of a nightmare he had no way of waking up from. I got my hands on that fence and screamed his name loud enough to tear something in my throat, screamed at the agent nearest him that this was my son, that he had nothing to do with any of it, that I could vouch for him with my own life if that's what it took. Time did something strange in those seconds. It didn't slow down so much as it simply stopped, the whole world narrowing down to the sight of 2 rifles pointed at the boy his mother and I raised. And I understood in that moment that I had spent 3 months so focused on catching one kind of danger that I never once accounted for the kind that would put my own child directly in its path. An agent I recognized from Diane's earlier calls came jogging over, spoke low into his radio, and within seconds the rifles lowered. Tyler's name got checked against something on a clipboard, and the same agent who'd had him at gunpoint reached out and steadied him by the shoulder when his knees nearly went. "He's clear," the agent called back toward the gate. "Civilian. Not part of the crew." Somebody cut the zip tie loose from around Tyler's wrists that I hadn't even realized they'd already put there, and he stumbled the last few feet toward the fence where I was waiting, and I pulled my son through the gap in that gate and held on to him the way I hadn't held on to anybody since his mother's funeral. He didn't cry right away. He just stood there shaking against me, staring past my shoulder at the woman being hauled toward a black van with her mascara streaked halfway down her face, still shouting that none of this was what it looked like. I watched something in Tyler's expression finish breaking apart and reassemble itself into something harder, something older than 33 years old had any right to look. He'd come out here tonight to catch his wife in a lie. Instead, he'd nearly ended up on the wrong end of a federal weapon because of choices that were never his to make, and no version of Kayla's excuses was ever going to talk her way back from what his own eyes had just witnessed. 3 days later, sitting at my kitchen table, Tyler's phone rang with a number neither of us recognized, and he looked at me for a long moment before he answered and put it on speaker. An automated voice announced a collect call from the county detention center, and then Kayla's voice came through, high and frantic, already spinning a story about being in the wrong place at the wrong time, begging him to find a lawyer, telling him none of it was what it looked like. Tyler sat there listening to her lie to him one more time, and I watched something in his face finish setting like concrete left out in the sun. "I heard everything, Kayla," he said finally, his voice flat and steady in a way that surprised even me. I was standing right there. Then he reached over and ended the call himself, blocked the number, and set the phone face down on the table without another word. He didn't cry that day. He filed for divorce within the week, and once the money stopped quietly disappearing from his registers, the rusty fork started climbing back to where it used to be almost immediately. He hired a part-time cook, started sleeping through the night again, started laughing with the regulars at the counter, the way he used to before Kayla Coleman ever walked into our lives. About 6 weeks after that night, I sat him down at the same kitchen table where his mother used to roll out biscuit dough every Sunday morning, and I slid a small brass key across the wood toward him. He looked at it, confused, the same way Carol used to look at me right before I surprised her with something she never saw coming. 3 years before your mother passed," I told him. We quietly set up a trust in your name alone, completely separate from the shop, from the house, from anything with the Coleman name easily attached to it. Kayla spent a year and a half hunting for a fortune she thought was hidden behind a rusted door. She never once suspected the real inheritance had been sitting untouchable in your name the whole time, protected by paperwork she never thought to go looking for, because she never once believed a man in a stained jumpsuit could outthink her. He hugged me the way he used to when he was 7 years old and scared of thunder rolling in off the water, and I held on to my son and didn't let go for a good long while. That evening, I walked down to the dock behind the shop with a glass of bourbon and watched the last light go orange and gold over the marsh grass, thinking about Carol, about the promise I made her at the graveside, about every callous 46 years in this business had left on my hands. Greed always shows its true face eventually, if you're patient enough to wait for it. You can build the prettiest life on top of a lie, but sooner or later the foundation cracks, and everybody standing on it goes down with it. What actually protects a family isn't money sitting behind a locked door somebody might find if they dig hard enough. It's the years you put in when nobody's watching. It's the promises you keep long after the person you made them to is gone. And sometimes, it's simply refusing to let your fear for the people you love stop you from letting the truth do its own slow, quiet work. People around here still see an old man in a stained jumpsuit and figure there goes somebody simple. Somebody who got lucky with a piece of waterfront land a long time ago. They don't see the 46 years it took to learn that the people who love you the loudest aren't always the ones who love you the truest. A father's job was never to hand his son a fortune and hope for the best. It was to build something quiet and unbreakable underneath him, so that when the ground gave way, as it always eventually does with people like Kayla, there was still solid rock waiting to catch him. I think about the look on Tyler's face that night by the fence more than I think about almost anything else these days. The way a grown man's whole world can crack open and put itself back together in the same 10 minutes. God only knows how close I came to losing him instead of just watching him lose her. God kept that boy standing on his own 2 feet through every part of it, and I thank God, every single evening on this dock, that the foundation his mother and I poured for him all those years ago never once depended on a woman who never learned how to love anything that couldn't be sold for a profit. If this story found its way to your heart tonight, do me a favor and hit that like button before you go. Tell me down in the comments, has anyone ever married into your family chasing something other than love? I read every single one of them, and I answer more than people expect from an old man who's slow with a keyboard. And if you want to ride along with me again next time, go ahead and subscribe, because there's always another story worth telling from this side of the marina. Take care of the people who'd take a bullet for you, and keep both eyes open for the ones who wouldn't.